Today, we're diving into some of the strangest and most disturbing alien-related cases ever reported. Cases that raise more questions than answers, and that, over the years, have been largely ignored or quietly buried. Or the bizarre phenomenon at Skinwalker Ranch, where whatever you encounter doesn't stay there.
It follows you home. The Ariel School incident in Zimbabwe, where 62 children witnessed the same beings and described the same message. And Project Serpo, a supposed secret exchange program between humans and a non-human civilization. We'll also look into the Wilson-Davis Memo, a leaked document that suggests governments may have recovered alien technology. Then, the theory that aliens might not be biological at all, but a form of advanced artificial intelligence. And finally, the case of Charles Hall and his 2-year encounter with the so-called tall whites at Nellis Air Force Base. These cases may seem different, but what if they're all part of the same puzzle? I'll let the visuals speak for themselves, but out. If you're enjoying this, make sure to subscribe.
Skinwalker Ranch is considered by many to be one of the most active paranormal locations in the world. But what truly makes this place different isn't just what happens there. It's the fact that for some people it doesn't stop when they leave. Located in Utah, the ranch became widely known after decades of reports involving strange lights in the sky, objects appearing and disappearing without explanation, unknown creatures described in similar ways by completely different witnesses, and shadow-like figures that seem to move with intention rather than randomly. Over the years, the area has been investigated not only by paranormal enthusiasts, but also by scientists, private research teams, and even government-funded programs. Cameras were installed, sensors were placed, data was collected. Yet despite all of this, no clear explanation has ever been found. But the most disturbing part is not what people see at the ranch. It's what happens after. There is a phenomenon known as the Hitchhiker Effect, and it describes something far more unsettling than a typical paranormal encounter. The idea is simple but deeply disturbing. The experiences at Skinwalker Ranch don't always stay there. They attach themselves to people and follow them home. This is not just about fear or imagination. In many cases, the events that happen afterward are witnessed by multiple members of the same family and manifest in very real physical ways. People who have spent time at the ranch have reported that once they return home, strange things begin to happen. Footsteps in empty rooms, doors opening or closing on their own, objects being moved or disappearing without any clear cause. Brief but unmistakable sightings of shadowy figures in corners of rooms. In some cases, these experiences are shared by others in the house, making it far more difficult to dismiss as coincidence. There have also been reports of electronics behaving abnormally. Lights turning on and off by themselves. TVs or phones activating without any input. Security cameras capturing movement where no one is present. And all of this happens not in some isolated location, but in ordinary homes, sometimes hundreds or even thousands of miles away from the ranch. What makes it even harder to ignore is that these events don't stop quickly. In some cases they continue for days. In others for weeks or even months. It's as if whatever people encountered is no longer tied to a place, but to them. Even some of the researchers who worked at Skinwalker Ranch have reported similar experiences after leaving. There are accounts of individuals who refused to continue their work because of what followed them home, things they could neither control nor explain. In several cases, the descriptions of these events are almost identical, even when the people involved had never met each other. Another detail that stands out is the consistency in how these entities or presences are described, both at the ranch and later in completely different locations. This raises the possibility that we are not dealing with isolated incidents or personal interpretations, but with something that has a clear and repeating pattern. Unlike traditional paranormal stories that are tied to a specific place, Skinwalker Ranch suggests something entirely different. Not a haunted location, but a point of contact. A place where something interacts with people. And sometimes doesn't stop there. And if this phenomenon is real, then the implications go far beyond a single ranch in Utah. It suggests the possibility of something that is not bound by space or distance in the way we understand it. And that changes everything. Because if something can follow you home, then it was never just about the ranch in the first place.
If you think that was strange, wait until you see what's next.
The Ariel School encounter is considered one of the most compelling and difficult to ignore alien cases, not because of a single witness, but because of the number of people involved and how consistent their testimonies were. The event took place in 1994 at the Ariel School in Ruwa, Zimbabwe. It was a normal school day, and during a mid-morning break, dozens of children were outside, playing in the schoolyard. The teachers were inside the building at the time, which means there was no adult present to influence what happened next. The children first noticed something unusual just beyond the school grounds, near a patch of bushland. Some of them described seeing a shiny object in the sky, similar to a disc, while others said it was closer to the ground, hovering silently. Even though their descriptions varied slightly, they all agreed on one thing: the object did not behave like anything they had ever seen before. Shortly after, several children reported that one or more beings emerged from the object. These beings were described in very similar ways by different children, even though they were interviewed separately. They were small, with thin bodies, large heads, and most notably very large black eyes. Some children said the beings did not walk normally, but seemed to glide, while others described sudden movements, as if they could move from one place to another without a clear transition. But the most unusual part was not just what they saw. It was what they experienced. Several children reported that the beings communicated with them, not through spoken language but directly into their minds. They did not hear voices, but received images and feelings, as if a message was being transmitted instantly without words. The message described by many of the children was also consistent. It was not random or meaningless. It focused on the idea that humanity is becoming too dependent on technology, that the future could become dangerous if this continues, and that something is wrong with the direction the world is heading. What makes this case even more powerful is what happened afterward. The children were interviewed both immediately after the event and in the days that followed. Psychologists and investigators, including Dr. John Mack from Harvard University, spoke with them individually. Instead of finding signs of imagination, confusion, or influence, many concluded that the children genuinely believed what they had experienced. Even more striking is that years later, many of those children, now adults, have told the exact same story with almost no changes. Their descriptions, emotions, and details remained consistent over time, which is extremely rare in cases based on imagination or fabricated memories. There was no clear motive for a hoax, no evidence of mass hysteria, no adult guiding the narrative, and no benefit for the children in making up such a story. Another important detail is their emotional reaction. Many of the children were not excited or entertained. They were visibly affected, some even frightened, not necessarily by how the beings looked, but by the intensity of the experience itself. Unlike many other cases that rely on a single witness or unclear evidence, this encounter is built on multiple independent testimonies that align in key details, both immediately after the event and many years later. And that is what makes it so difficult to ignore. Because when dozens of children separated from each other describe the same beings, the same object, and the same type of message, it becomes increasingly difficult to explain everything as coincidence or imagination. This was not just a sighting. It was a shared experience, happening at the same time, and whatever happened that day left an impact that never truly faded.
Stay with me. The best part is coming next?
Project Serpo is one of the most controversial and debated stories in the entire UFO and alien disclosure community because it goes far beyond sightings or encounters. It suggests something much more direct: contact, cooperation, and even exchange. According to the claims, Project Serpo was a secret program initiated by the United States government sometime in the 1960s, following the events of the Roswell crash in 1947. The story says that after the crash, at least one non-human being survived, and over time communication was established between that being's civilization and the U.S. military. What makes this story different is what allegedly happened next. Instead of just studying recovered technology or analyzing debris, the narrative claims that an agreement was made. An exchange program. 12 human beings selected and trained by the U.S. government were sent to another planet, known as Serpo, located in the Zeta Reticuli star system. In return, information and technology were supposedly shared between both sides. But not everything about the mission was ideal. According to some versions of the story, not all members of the team survived. The conditions on the planet were difficult, and over the course of the mission, several of them died. Others reportedly chose to remain there permanently, while a smaller group eventually returned to Earth after completing the mission. The information we have about Project Serpo does not come from official confirmation, but from alleged leaked documents, anonymous sources, and emails that began circulating in the early 2000s. These messages described the mission in detail, including timelines, names, and technical aspects, which made the story even more intriguing. At the same time, this is also what makes it so controversial. There is no direct proof that can confirm the entire story. No official acknowledgement, no publicly verified evidence. Some researchers believe it to be an elaborate hoax, while others argue that the level of detail and internal consistency suggests that at least parts of it could be based on real events. What keeps the story alive is not just the idea itself, but the implications behind it. Because if Project Serpo is even partially true, it would mean that contact with a non-human civilization did not just happen. It was organized, controlled, and kept hidden from the public. It would mean that the question is no longer whether we are alone, but how long the truth has been kept out of reach. And if an exchange like this really took place, then whatever was learned from it may still be shaping decisions today, without anyone outside a very small circle ever knowing.
What do you think about this? It only gets more intense from here.
The Wilson-Davis Memo is one of those documents that, if taken seriously, has the potential to completely change how we understand the entire UFO phenomenon. Not because it provides a clear, undeniable piece of evidence like a photograph or a recovered object, but because of what it suggests exists behind the scenes. The document itself is not an official government report. It wasn't released in a press conference, and it doesn't follow the structure of a formal disclosure. Instead, it appears to be a detailed set of notes, essentially a record of a private conversation. And that is exactly what makes it so interesting, because it doesn't feel like something written for the public, but rather something internal. The conversation is said to have taken place around 2002, between Admiral Thomas Wilson, a former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and Eric Davis, a physicist who has worked on advanced aerospace and theoretical research programs, including areas connected to unidentified phenomena. This is where things begin to stand out. According to the memo, Wilson was not casually looking into rumors. He was actively trying to confirm whether certain highly classified programs existed, programs allegedly focused on the recovery and study of vehicles of unknown origin, what most people would simply call crashed UFOs. But despite his position, despite having one of the highest levels of clearance in the system, he reportedly discovered something unexpected. There was a program, and he did not have access to it. Not because he lacked clearance, but because the program itself was structured in a way that placed it outside the normal chain of command. That detail alone changes everything. It suggests the existence of deeply compartmentalized black programs, so restricted that even senior officials cannot access them. This is not just secrecy toward the public, this is secrecy within the system itself. According to the notes, Wilson was able to trace the existence of this program far enough to confirm that it was real. However, it was allegedly managed by a private contractor rather than a traditional government agency. And that matters. Because once a program is moved into the private sector, it becomes far more difficult to oversee. It avoids many of the checks, audits, and layers of accountability that exist within government structures. In other words, it becomes easier to hide. The memo goes further. It claims that this program was in possession of a craft of unknown origin and that efforts were being made to understand its technology. However, progress was described as extremely limited. The people working on it were not able to fully understand how it functioned. That raises an important point. Either the technology was so advanced that it exceeded current human understanding, or it was never designed to be understood in the way we normally analyze technology. When Wilson attempted to gain official access to the program, he was reportedly denied. Not in a vague or bureaucratic way, but directly and clearly. He was told to stop asking questions, that he did not have a need to know. And this is where the core idea of the memo becomes clear. We are not just talking about secrets being kept from the public. We are talking about secrets being kept from within the system itself. Which leads to a much deeper question. Who is actually in control of this information? Because if someone at Wilson's level could not access this program, then it must be controlled by an even smaller, more restricted group, one that operates above or outside traditional structures. Another important aspect is the tone of the conversation itself. Wilson is not presented as someone speculating or exaggerating. He comes across as frustrated, even surprised, that he encountered a barrier inside a system he was used to navigating. Over time, the authenticity of the memo has been debated. Some argue that it could be fabricated or exaggerated, since there is no official confirmation. Others point out that certain details align with other independent claims and leaks, giving it a degree of credibility that is difficult to ignore. But even without a confirmed status, the significance of the memo lies in what it implies. Not just the existence of unknown technology, but the existence of a mechanism designed to hide, manage, and control that knowledge beyond normal oversight. And if such a mechanism exists, then the question is no longer just whether unidentified technology has been recovered. The question becomes much more direct. How much of our reality is filtered before it reaches us? And who decides what we are allowed to know? The case of the tall whites at Nellis Air Force Base is one of those stories that doesn't rely on a single moment or a brief sighting, but on a prolonged experience that allegedly lasted for years. The story comes from Charles Hall, a former U.S. Air Force serviceman who worked as a weather observer in the 1960s. He was stationed in a remote area near Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, where alongside his regular duties he claims to have had repeated encounters with a non-human species he later referred to as the tall whites. What makes this case stand out is the duration and consistency of the experience. Hall does not describe a single encounter or a distant object in the sky. He describes a period of approximately 2 years during which he reportedly saw these beings multiple times, under different circumstances. Sometimes from a distance, other times much closer. According to his descriptions, the tall whites were significantly taller than an average human, with extremely pale, almost translucent skin, and features that were clearly not human. Their movements were described as controlled but somewhat rigid, and they appeared to be highly aware of their surroundings at all times. An interesting detail is that Hall did not describe them as openly hostile, but neither as friendly in any familiar sense. They seemed reserved, calculated, and focused, as if they had a specific purpose and no interest in unnecessary interaction. He also claimed that their presence in the area was not random. At certain points, there appeared to be unspoken rules about how humans were expected to behave around them. Hall suggested that he was indirectly warned not to get too close or startle them, because their reactions could become unpredictable. Another element that adds a different layer to this story is the idea that these beings were not entirely separate from human activity in that area. According to Hall, there were moments when high-ranking military personnel interacted with these entities in a controlled manner, suggesting that their presence was known and, to some extent, managed. It was not described as a chaotic or emergency situation, but more like a quiet, controlled coexistence. He also claimed that the tall whites used advanced technology, including suits or equipment that helped them move or adapt more easily within Earth's environment. They were said to have their own craft and a minimal infrastructure in the area, far from public view. One of the most important aspects of Hall's account is the way he presents it. He does not describe these experiences in an exaggerated or dramatic way. Instead, his tone is calm, almost technical, focusing on repeated observations and small details. Over the years, his story has remained largely unchanged, which for some people adds a degree of credibility. Of course, there is no official confirmation of these claims. There are no verified documents, no clear visual evidence, and no public acknowledgement from the military that such interactions ever took place. For many, it remains a personal account that cannot be proven. However, what keeps this case relevant is how it fits into a broader pattern seen in other reports. The idea that not all encounters with non-human entities are accidental. The possibility that some of them are controlled, monitored, or even accepted at certain levels. And if that is true even partially, then we are no longer talking about isolated sightings or unexplained events. We are talking about the possibility of a constant presence, existing alongside us without most people ever being aware of it. And that changes the perspective entirely. Because at that point the question is no longer just whether something exists, but how much of reality we are not seeing, simply because it is not meant to be seen.
Some truths stay hidden. Subscribe for more.